Okay, welcome everyone. So this is the next in our series of virtual seminars from the DARA family. Many thanks to everyone again for tuning in and joining this one. As you will have noticed now, we no longer require you to type your name into the chat window in your country. Basically, we've been upgrading our software to use for these webinars now, and so all the details of the participants are automatically recorded. So you don't need to do that. So it's a pleasure today to welcome Steve Jones, who's I've known for many years now. We started out working together on the Goonhilly project when he was the commercial director for Goonhilly Earth Station Limited. So that's, for those of you who don't know, that's the sort of joint public-private partnership that's going on in the UK to convert big radio X telecommunication dishes into radio telescopes down at the site in the far southwest of England. So we got to know each other then. And but in more recent times, then Steve has joined the DARA project as our business consultant, working part-time, providing advice to individual members of the DARA family, so current and former DARA trainees who are interested in starting up a business, linked, often to ideas and skills that they've developed or been inspired to think about during the DARA program itself. So as I mentioned previously, then this is now making sure that our e-seminar series really covers the full range of activities that DARA is involved with. And as I've mentioned many times, our biggest mark of success probably will not be in training astronomers to run radio telescopes in Africa. Our biggest mark of success, certainly from our funding point of view, would be from DARA trainees successfully creating jobs and wealth and helping with the address development issues in your home countries. Also during the first of these e-seminars, when we were asking, what topics do you want us to discuss in future, then this topic of starting up businesses was actually the main request that people sent in. So showing that we listened to your feedback, then we got Steve on board straight away to sign up for one of these. So without further ado, I'll welcome Steve and hand over to him to deliver his presentation. As usual with these e-seminars, then you can type any questions that you think of into the Q&A box during the talk, but we will take all the questions at the end. I will endeavor to unmute you at the time so that you can ask your question yourself. So please be prepared to do that. Make sure you've unmuted yourself as well, when I allow you to, so that you can ask your question. If not, I can ask the question for you. It's not a problem. Okay, so let's hand over to Steve.
Well, many thanks, Melvin. That's a very nice introduction. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining. This morning, I'm going to share a personal view of the processes involved in conceiving, planning, and executing a business plan. This is not an accountancy or a finance lecture, but a practical guide, really, to the questions you might ask yourselves when you are considering starting a business. There are different ways to follow a passion and run organizations to deliver products or services. You could work as a charity, efficiently distributing education outreach or aid, or any other non-profit activity. And they're all fantastic things to do. The aim of this talk, however, is to focus on new start, commercial, financially sustainable businesses that generates enough income to give a good livelihood to those who are involved in it. So my first slide is really just to introduce myself. Some of you will know me from previous meetings or discussions, so hello to you and good to be speaking to you again. So I'm Steve Jones, and first thing to say is I'm not an academic. I'm semi-retired from business, having spent years considering the different potential approaches to addressing the questions I'm raising with you today. I've created new start businesses, and I've helped evolve mature, larger ones. And so I cover the range of experiences. I've also supported young businesses in their own growth aspirations. As Melvin mentioned, I wrote the business plans and forecasts for Goonhilly Earth Station Limited in the UK, which is where I commenced my relationship with the radio astronomy academic world, and maintained that link ever since. Just to put things in context, I haven't always got things right. And my objective is to, as far as possible, minimize the mistakes that anyone on this lecture, this webinar will make as they pursue their own business plans and any other considerations they will have in their future careers. I am currently employed by DARA on a part-time basis, and I can offer some time to DARA students who may have their own specific ambitions to start their own business. What I'm going to talk to you about this morning is, having established why you are thinking of starting a business, how you can evaluate whether you have the right business proposition by practical goal setting and subsequently managing your own risk. I will preach to you. Apologies up front. Those who've heard me before will know that I have potential to preach. So apologies for the preaching about the importance of customer engagement and market research before I give a practical overview of financial forecasting and how you can apply simple techniques to your own benefit. I will conclude on what I believe funders will be looking for and how you can be ready to embrace their engagement. So, first important question: why am I starting this business? Perhaps I can add a little African context here. For those of you considering starting a business in a space-related activity, the African space industry is currently worth $7.37 billion, projected to grow to over $10.2 billion in the next 5 years. That's according to the African Space Industry Annual Report. The industry is growing in terms of the number of ventures and the variety of innovation. So, what skills are needed and what are being looked for to fuel this growth? Largely, these skills are comparable ones to the ones you guys have. What DARA students have in their experience tank is exactly the right mix that can support the African space growth, if that's what your interest allows you to pursue. And it's therefore entirely rational for you to consider your options in all respects of your future employment choices. Now, that might well be starting a business. It could well be as an academic or indeed a senior employee. So what reasons may you have for starting a business in a related or indeed unrelated field to your studies? There are, of course, many reasons, and I'll seek to just pull a few of them out, but it's just for you to question yourself on your own motivations. Your potential reasons could include that you've seen a specific opportunity, or that you've been asked to fulfill a specific role by someone else. You might have been asked by a colleague to work together. You may have a customer who asks you to provide a bespoke service based on your skills, or perhaps you are just between jobs, academic roles, and maybe you're just bored and you have time on your hands and you want to find out what the horizon means to you. Time on your hands could be a dangerous motivation to start a business. Having time can support the creative and reflective thoughts for some busy people, for sure. Time can also be absorbed by an emotional attachment to an enticing business project idea that you are passionate about. So a note of caution here: beware. Beware this emotional attachment to an idea just because you can't readily see another option. Okay, so I think I want to start a business. What resources do I have? What does it take to start this process? Well, primarily, for all successful business startups, you need a motivated individual at its heart. This is as important in the research and evaluation process as it is in actually running the business. What about your capabilities? What are your skills? Are they technical? Are they interpersonal? Are they presentational? Are they planning? How will these skills overlap with your business idea? Be clear with yourself why you are starting your business. Be confident that you have the skills to evaluate and deliver this business. Understand the self-motivation which will be required to make this a success. The next part of the journey is, once you've established that for yourself, is to consider goal setting and how you'll manage your risk. I'm going to be clear with you. Your time is precious. I believe many of you that are on this call now have the capability to investigate and create a compelling business venture. You are clearly a group of very capable individuals who are likely to be a success in many other environments, including academia or employment. I guess the trick is to recognize the right vehicle for your ambitions. In this context, make sure that you choose the right evaluation process of your business idea. At this point, be mindful that you do not immediately jump to solutions or conclusions about your business idea without undertaking the necessary research activity at the start. I've said this to others on the call, and I think it's still true. Treat the potential business idea as an academic research project. Set yourself a time limit, scope the research necessary to provide the information required for you to come to an informed decision. Base it on facts, not emotion, not feel. This is the scientific, objective approach that you would instinctively use in your own studies. Research, evaluate data, make recommendations based on your observations. It's familiar territory for you guys, and use that skill set in the business evaluation process. Agree with yourself up front, your methodology. And at the time, and put the time aside and agree that you will put the time aside to invest into this research. It would be great if you could find some peer review of your approach, someone that's close to you or people that are close to you that you trust and respect. That would be ideal. Don't be afraid to share your approach with thoughtful friends and fellow students or academics, just for a critique of your approach and a sanity check. At the end of the process, once you've done the research and pulled your data together and made your observations, be cold with yourself. When you review the data, be objective. And your training through DARA and your academic studies should help you be the objective animal you need to be in this assessment. Okay, so let's get down to the nitty-gritty. We've got the idea, we've got the methodology of how we're going to investigate this business idea. Where do we go from there? This is the difficult bit. We'll make no apologies for making this a central part of talk with you, because I've done it with others on this call and I will do it in the future. This is the voice of experience who has not done this in the past, and I've wasted my own time and my own energy on a business that needed to have the proper evaluation. So here it is. This is the hard yards. How big and how realizable is this business opportunity that you've identified, and how can you find out? After all, for any product or service, market demand should be the driver, and the customer is the ultimate arbiter of whether your business will succeed or not. That sounds really important, critical even, and actually it fundamentally is. Here's the problem though. This part of the process is really difficult for most of us, including the most academically high achieving. At one level, it's easy. Let's start by saying we'll define the customer for the product or service you're wishing to launch as closely as you can. For example, if you wish to offer data hosting or processing services, rather than target the customer as being a generic other businesses, define your potential customer as narrowly as possible. And as a thought starter, you might consider, firstly, customers who have services currently hosted or processed and who would be interested in your more reliable, more cost-effective, higher added value service proposition. Perhaps it would be businesses who should have these businesses and are perfect to have a massive benefit to themselves once you've described to them that these are the services that they need in a very simple way. Thirdly, you might decide geographically that you only want to do business with folk within 50 kilometers or 100 kilometers from your business service or your offices or your operation, because you want to be able to speak and service and have those discussions. Fourthly, there is one element of this which needs to be a filter for all the specific customers that you're seeking to target, and that is businesses must be able to pay for your service. So as you do your filtering of the whole cohort of businesses that you might want to speak to, and you start to consolidate those into a smaller number, you put that filter across them. You do your own research on businesses that are able to pay for your service, because at the end of the day, that is what's going to make your business sustainable. The closer you can define your customer in each business model, the better. Now, this is the hard part. Then you actually have to go and engage with these potential customers by any and every method possible and assess objectively their appetite to buy your service or product. Now, a common question at this point is, yes, Steve, but how can I find these customers? How do I communicate with these customers? It really is hard. There's no hiding from it. However, this is the rub. If you can't answer these questions at this stage, why do you think you can answer with confidence this question with certainty when you have 12 months of iterating a business plan, investing your time, irritating your friends, and potentially taking your family, your banks, and your own money into this venture? Emails, visits, telephone calls, trade shows, online surveys, social medias can all be used to generate evidence and information. To give this research weight, as firm a commitment as possible in writing, by email, in a letter, that can be evidence from a customer, potential customer, does have value. In parallel, you may be developing your product or service while you're speaking to these closely defined customer sets that you want to potentially do some business with. This is particularly well suited to undertaking in parallel these customer conversations on your product or service. It's entirely plausible, in fact, highly likely, that your customer offer will be modified as a result of these conversations in the light of the customer feedback. Okay, so there's the preaching to some degree. I may return to it, and apologies when I do. So once we've done all the hard work with the customers, how do we start to evaluate whether this has a shape of a business that could be sustainable? And how do I then start to evaluate it? So as a general rule, you're unlikely to get your costs wrong. You'll get quotes, you can benchmark your ideas with other comparative existing businesses. Key to your decision on whether you should proceed, however, is how confident you are on the revenue you can generate. This will take and should take most of your time and energy. And this, as we've already discussed, is the most difficult information to access. A rough cash flow should be a good guide to prompt whether your business idea can generate enough cash to be sustainable. Now, the rough cash flow is for you, and it's for you to make some sense of the information of the research as you receive it. If, when you do your research and you have your costs and your revenue, you have identified that you need to spend a lot of money on premises, on equipment, on people, on servers, on software, and there's a big barrier that's a upfront capital requirement, don't panic, not at this point. If the rest of your business case stacks up, an investor or banker understands that their role is that of an enabler. The rough cash flow model can be used to show that an introduction of a lump sum borrowing from a bank, for example, and the subsequent repayment of that loan in the subsequent months can be seen as a business cost that is easily dealt with if your business model is sustainable. Let me talk to you about my fictional hat business. My little cursor running around the screen. So just to illustrate the rough forecasting cash flow, I've researched the market traders in my regional markets, and I've assessed the most popular selling hats and the cost price of supplying them. I have interest and commitment enough from the stall holders who've confirmed to me that, yeah, if I can get the price and the quality right, they would be very happy to buy at a better quality hat at a decent price from myself. I've also had a commitment for next year, my third-party sales, from someone overseas in the international field that would like to buy some hats in bulk from me. And I've researched the online market in parallel and understand the volumes that are currently being sold and at what price they're being sold. I've also looked then at the costs of providing those services. And what I haven't done at this point is considered how much upfront capital I might need. I've used my research to populate the volumes and the money in terms of dollars that I'm able to create as an income. I've also then populated the costs down below. And there are materials and the direct labor costs of providing the services, but also the overheads of marketing, electricity. I've agreed with myself how much money that I would like to take out of the business while I've set it up. And I've come to a point where if I didn't have the initial capital in play, that was zero. My Q4 performance of 2020 would show that I would have a deficit of $1.3K. So I'd be out of pocket on this business plan, on this rough order of magnitude cash flow. I would be short of $1.3K because I have to pay for my premises up front. I've got other costs to pay out before I start returning the income that I've got commitment to receive. So knowing that at that point of the cash flow, I'm going to be $1.3K out of pocket, I have calculated that if I was able to have a loan of $1.5K, which is $1.3K plus around 10% contingency, that I'm building an interest rate for repayment of that over the next 5 years, that I'm able to remain cash positive. So I can always pay for things because I've always got cash in the bank, but also it gets me to the point in the succeeding years of building up a surplus every month. This is just an illustration of if you do your research right and have the right commitment at the top, and you're going to be reasonably accurate about this bit at the bottom, you will show a deficit in your cash. And that's the amount of money that you look to set your business up with. You don't start there and end up with the cash flow. You produce the cash flow to determine what your requirement is. Another way to sanity check your potential business performance within a cash flow context is to consider the difference between what it costs for you to make your product or deliver your service, which is often called the variable cost, and the price paid for it, where the customer pays you for it. And that's often called the contribution or the gross margin. So for example, if it costs me $1 to make a hat, if I add up the materials and the direct labor, and I sell it for $4, so it's cost me $1 and I've sold it for $4, that gives me a contribution of $3 to pay to all my business overhead expenses, all the rest of the costs that aren't variable, that are fixed. So again, I get $4 for my hat, it cost me $1 in materials and labor, I have a contribution of $3. This can be a useful number, and some people prefer to think of it in this context, because you can assess how many hats I would need to sell to cover my fixed costs, or the term break even. So if the costs of running my operation are $600 per month, let's say, then I would need to sell at $3 contribution per hat, $200 to be able to break even. After that, I can consider myself sustainable because I've paid all the costs incurrent in running my business. And then I can look to generate growth and new products and more people and employment. In practice, you will have more than one product. And in practice, those contribution rates will be different. But your forecasting will help you define that break-even point and the mix of those products to do so. So we've got the rough order of magnitude cash flow that you've pulled together, and you've beaten yourself up with trying to make sure that you've been cold and objective in your assessment, particularly on the customer. So where do we go from there? It's not failure to proceed if your research is complete and it does not conclusively present you with a positive picture. That's the smart thing to do. It's you walk away if you've done your research and you can't convince yourself that this is the right vehicle for you and your future ambitions, reject it until another until another idea is around, or you have new information about your idea. And I would suggest you reflect and research an alternative. As I've said before, your time is valuable. You work on projects with the best chance of success. If we determine what we think failure is actually not being clinical in your assessment of your forecast business chances and growing an emotional attachment to your idea. You will always find, in my experience, you will always find reasons and rationalizations on why your idea should be exciting to other people. However, as scientists, you will know that evidence is the key, and you will need to be the judge of whether the data and the intelligence you have acquired is sufficient for you to invest further resources of time or dollars into this potential business venture. I repeat, deciding not to proceed is not failure. It's smart. Failure is continue to believe in a business concept when you do not have the evidence to back up your confidence. You've gone through these different filtrations of doing the hard work, making the financial draft assessment, being clinical with that evidence and suggesting something that you believe in and you can persuade others is financially sustainable. What will funders look for? And will I be ready? Funders need not be considered. I see funders as a key necessary component of your business success. Whether banks providing loan facilities, which you will need to repay, or equity investors looking for multiple return on their risk capital, they're all a key component of your business life. Even before receiving any money, a potential funder serves a great initial purpose. They are a sanity check on your business proposition. If a financially knowledgeable organization or individual is not prepared to risk their time, their money to agree a relationship with you, frankly, you should be asking yourself, Should I pursue this? I'm confident that you will produce a professional business plan containing all the relevant parts a funder would expect to see. When you go into that conversation, you're the cohort of people that will present your case really well. It might feel like a daunting task, but my pitch to you is that you've invested the time up front in the right research activities, and writing a business plan at the end of that process is merely a vehicle for you to demonstrate your confidence in your business proposition. I'm going to just give you a personal view on a framework that you might consider, or I would certainly consider if I was. Now, other parties might have different nuances on this, and you will have a personal preference that communicates your story, your vision, your business. I suspect most of them will have the elements to their business. I'm going to retrace my steps a little bit and say, don't start here. Don't start with the business plan because you have a template you feel you need to fill. Leave that to the back of the process. Do the hard work first, and then this becomes a consequence of the work that you've done rather than the focal point of the work you intend to do. Now, once you'll see the questions aligned with the sorts of aspects you might expect to read in a business plan. I just want to point out a couple of them because we've already had many of these questions because you will have resolved them in the work you've done. So, executive summary. Many of us forget that at our peril. A paragraph, 2 paragraphs max on what you are asking for, what your business proposition is, and why you're asking for it, what you will do with that money, and what the return and the benefit is to the person that might provide that facility. That's because if you can summarize things in a paragraph, the investor will not feel the need to flick through pages of a business plan trying to work out whether they've got a level of interest. Sometimes you're able to define that there's not an interest because of sector, quanta, whatever. There's an appetite disconnect with the funder purely on the basis of the executive summary. And you maintain a relationship a lot easier if you're able to be very direct with that funder and be very specific in what you're asking for. Equally, if that's read and they have a level of interest, they will delve deeper into the subsequent pages. So I commend an executive summary to be punchy and to put your ask up front. The rest of these, we're very happy to talk through with you, but I think these are all things that you will have dealt with. And as I say, you become a shop window of the activities that you've undertaken. So before I conclude, I just wanted to say that funders, when they look at your business case, spend around 20% of their time discussing the practicalities of putting together the mechanics of your concept, who you are, your relevant experience, references, your technical capabilities, where you're getting your kit from, what's the supply chain, costs and the cash flow impacts of your payments. They'll ask about that for about 20% of the time. They may spend a good chunk of that 20% of the time working out whether what you propose to pay yourself is realistic. They will not want to see, and they will contract against you taking large slices of funders' capital from day one out of the business. But most of the conversation you will have will be with respect to the numbers that you've presented in your income or your revenue line, as I preached earlier. They will want to know, with as much certainty as possible, that they will get back at least as much as they put into your venture. Now, this is the good bit, because you've already spent most of your time on this area, and as we've discussed, you should be well placed to present your objective findings from your potential customers with your support, which support your forecast revenue lines. In your business plan framework at the bottom, in the appendices, You will have customer letters of intent, of support. You may have contingent contracts. You will have the level of comfort that that funder wants to spend 80% of his time talking about. Equally, and I just want to make this point to you, it's not just about, do I need to do this to get the money? And the nuance on that is, the better your research, the more favorable you are likely to be able to negotiate the interest rate of your loan or the percentage release of your equity. So this hard work isn't about a granular go, no go, can I get my money, can I not, because I've proven it to you that this is a good business case. It's actually mitigating risk for the funder, and on that basis, by his risk mitigation, he's more able, or she's more able, to give more favorable terms to you because there's less perceived risk. And here's the rub. If there's a good chance that there's less risk for a funder, there's going to be less risk for you. And ultimately, this is the primary selfish reason for doing the work up front, is because you, your family, your aspirations are best served by mitigating the risk of your business not being successful. The rough order of magnitude cash flow is a really good start, and I really commend you to just use that to draft and doodle your own thoughts against. However, when you come to the point of talking to a funder, you will need to build this into a profit and loss account and probably a balance sheet. If you've got a sound cash flow, however, again, this is a presentational or a consequential outcome rather than a forecast driver in its own right. You'll have all the detail. You just need, if you can't do it yourself, an accountant or a friend who's doing an accountancy course, to put that into the figures already done, just put it into the right framework, or a P&L and a balance sheet. Just as a thought, there's no dressing it up, and again, this is experience. Negative feedback from a funder is never welcome. I have been devastated, crushed, frustrated, angry, absolutely bewildered why funders didn't see things as clearly as I could see them from time to time. The feedback still has value though. Proactively see, I encourage you to proactively seek the specific areas of concern the funder may have with your business case. From this understanding, you're in a good position to review, revisit, and undertake further work as needed to make your case more compelling. Or, if the funder's raised issues which on reflection you consider fundamental, at this point you might choose to refocus your efforts in a different direction. In a sense, this is free, impartial, knowledgeable advice on your specific business plan. Treat it as such, even through the disappointment. So, thanks for listening this morning. I'm not seeking to be negative about your considerations for starting a business. I'm keen for you to efficiently work out if you've got a good chance of success. Facts, evidence, rather than emotional attachment. If you feel that you want a sanity check on any thoughts you may have, please feel free to contact me subsequently. Please feel you can reach out to me. Thanks for listening. I look forward to some questions.
Well, thanks very much, Steve, for that very comprehensive run through of all the things you need to consider if you want to start up a business idea. I'm sure that's been really useful to the attendees. We've had several questions come in already. So let's start to take some of these. Patrick Agutu was first out of the mark, asking several questions, but I think maybe, Patrick, if you could just ask, in the light of the rest of the talk, perhaps one of your questions first, just to get the ball rolling, and we can come back to the others if need be. So, I'll ask one of the questions, Patrick.
So, what is the procedure of defining the customer.
Yeah, great. I mean, that's the heart of it. I could have not talked for the last 40 minutes, Patrick, and that would have been the most perfect question. How do you define the customer? So the simple thing to say is, if you can't define the customer, then don't think about the business. Because as I say, if you don't know what it is before you can't work it out before you start, you certainly ain't going to work it out once you've done the hard work and got it sorted in terms of any capital costs or any time you've invested. Traditionally, the person who's going to pay for your product or service is how the research works. You will have people who provide similar services. You might go and research their websites. You might look at social media. You might equally not sell directly to the person who you think is the end consumer of your product, Patrick. You might look at people as another route to market that already has a relationship with that customer that you might choose to have a conversation with. So you might choose to go to a business that's between you and the customer, because trying to find selling, let's say, some kind of mobile application phone, trying to sell that to each individual iPhone user is a lot more problematic than selling to someone who already has a relationship with millions, billions of iPhone users. So there isn't, if you've got a specific sector in mind or a product or service in mind, then I'd be more than happy to speak to you offline, Patrick, and contact me and we'll talk about that. But as a generic answer, that's the key question that you have to resolve with your business idea. And depending on which sector and which customer it is, your approach might be subtly different. But look at your competitors, who you're competing with, and look at who currently serves the customer you're aiming to get to.
Okay, thanks for that, Steve. And thanks for that, Patrick. We might come back to your other questions later, but let's try and give everyone a chance to ask their questions. Also, just to clarify a few things coming in on the chat, then these seminars are recorded and we're putting them out on the YouTube channel. There'll be more, so there's a DARA YouTube channel now. So Trish will mention more about that at the end, I believe. For those of you who've either raised your hand or said in the chat that you want to ask a question, like Sayram, then it will help us greatly if you can just type your question into the Q&A window, and that way we'll make sure we don't forget your questions. Okay, so I think we'll take the next one from Solomon, who's got one to sort of combine this idea of starting a business, but also with the current conditions because of the pandemic. So Solomon, do you want to go ahead and ask your questions?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Hi.
All right. So I have a two-part question. So the very first one asks that, so in view of this pandemic, are there any key information that every person looking to begin a startup needs to know or consider? And then the second one is, I understand that our civilization has faced several other pandemics in the past. I'm not sure how this pandemic ranks among all the others in terms of the effect on businesses around the world. However, at the moment, what are some of the key ideas or reforms, if any, to be introduced to help businesses to get back to full strength, or some of the things businesses should do to overcome some of the effects? And to answer this, I would want you to use an e-learning business as an example. Thank you.
Okay, so the question was, are there any specific advice through the COVID pandemic that would help businesses start? And the second part of your question was whether, given that current change of the current status of global business community as it currently is, are there any suggestions of how businesses can react to that? Was that right, Solomon?
Yes, that's right.
So specific businesses advice is, I would very much guess, is country dependent, Solomon, because we're all governed, you know, in my part of the world, it was governed by different rules to people across into Europe. And governments have responded differently in terms of might encourage, support innovation, or even continuing of business during this time. I feel vulnerable to saying too much about your circumstances, but I think as a general rule, a lot of businesses have obviously gone to more remote delivery of their services and personal interaction, clearly. You asked it in the context of an e-learning business sector. Now, depending on where you are, schools are in different parts of their profile, aren't they? And students are in different situations, whether they're still at home or whether they're in academic institutions. So you are, if there are academic institutions that you wish to sell your services to, then you obviously it's helpful if they're actually there and engaged and open for business, as it were. But it's probably a really good time, if they are, for you to be in contact and to be saying exactly what you're doing. So I would be looking at, if you're selling e-learning to academic institutions, getting your shopping list of potential customers and contacting them through the hard yards. If you're selling to individuals, it's perhaps using, more people are spending more time on social media now than perhaps they were, and using social media to advertise and promote your services and test appetite for whatever you want to sell. In terms of the global situation, at a high level, the amount of cash that people have to invest in private equities is high. So if you had a very big requirement for money, the market isn't that bad. If you wanted to go to a listed company, there's a lot of money around for the right ideas. Venture capitalist wise, which is the highest risk part of that profile, there is less money around, there's less risk, and the deals that are getting done are taking longer. So translate that into the COVID. I think it's because there's less certainty on what business will look like. I don't think the investment scenario is healthy right now for those with risk propositions to start up. Banks, different. You might find locally that you've got a different level of appetite for banks to support you start businesses during the pandemic. And I don't know your individual circumstances well enough, Solomon, but can I encourage you to drop me a note about your business idea? Use my email address and see if there's something we can figure out together about how we might maximize your chances of finding out some information. Is that okay, Solomon?
All right, thank you. I'll do that.
Yeah, great. Look forward to seeing it.
Yes, I'll do that.
Great.
All right. Thank you.
Melvin, you're muted, mate.
So that'll keep Solomon busy while he's waiting to come to Leeds and start his masters, and then he can see you in person all the time. Yeah, just once those people have asked their question, if they can then mute themselves again, or don't be surprised if I mute you. We'll just, keep the level of background noise down. That'd be great. Thank you. So next up we have Joseph Mwatakanga from Namibia, who's going to ask a question. Apologies for my pronunciation if I'm getting things wrong. Okay, Joseph, you should be able to talk now.
Hi, Joseph.
Hello.
Hi.
This is just with regard to, do I need to have like a business plan first, or perhaps that comes up later on?
Yeah.
Like in terms, like perhaps, do I need to have a finished product first before having to have a business plan?
Great question, and it's one that we think about a lot. So if you're looking to make a product for a particular application, if you need capital to make that, then it's easier to get the capital if you're in a position to provide the customer research that we talked about. I personally, we can talk about this offline, but not be stressed about the business plan or the amount of money right now, because I think people get hung up on quanta and saying, where can I get hold of $2,000 or $10,000 or 20? It would be easier to get $1 million if you had $3 million worth of customer commitment in your pocket than to get $1,000 if you had no commitment from anybody. It was just an idea. So we shouldn't get hung up on quanta, but what we can do is make sure that we've got a, excuse me a second.
It's the first time we've had dog stop seminar. That's quite a new one for us.
Yeah, so what you can do is you spend time speaking to your potential customers and seeing what their requirements are of your product and service. See if you can get some commitment in writing that says, from one end, it'd be great to have a list of orders, Joseph. You know, if you had this product, I'd buy loads off you. That'd be lovely. More likely is someone saying, if you could produce this product at this price and this quality, I would be interested in talking to you. So even the appendix full of those, when you go and ask for your money to create your product, it does make a difference, even though it's not a binding contract. There's a level of comfort that a funder would take from having that level of research that you've done and commitment. But as a generalized answer to probably a very specific situation that you have, and again, I would encourage you to drop me a note if you feel there's value in that, and I'd love to learn a little bit more about your thoughts. But the business plan is at the end of your research rather than at the beginning. I think that would be my message.
Okay, thank you. I think this is okay. I'll drop in an email.
Great, Joseph. Look forward to it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Joseph. Next up, my old friend Nchimi has a question coming in from, well, our old friend Nchimi
Yes.
has a question.
Jimmy, how are you doing?
You should be able to talk, Nchimi, if you unmute yourself.
Well,
Oh, okay.
there you go. There you go. Hi, Jimmy. How are you doing?
Okay, great. So, mine is a very simple one. There's an acronym USB under the business plan framework.
Yes.
What does it mean?
Thank you, Jimmy. That's I should have explained. I get irritated when I see an acronym, an abbreviation that no one tells me what it is. So you're every right to ask the question. USP, unique selling point. So if you are making a point of difference between you and your competitors, if you are providing, I don't know, a school or a teaching facility in your locality or your region, and you want to promote your school or your teaching facility against someone else, you will look and make a list of the USPs, the unique selling points. What's different about my school, which is attractive to folk that would like to send their students to me? And you say it's because of my references, my credibility, we have N computers, we teach Python training, we do whatever, and you make those unique against your competitors. Does that make sense, Jimmy?
Absolutely. And I must confess that from the last time we discussed, in terms of time framework, I think I've failed your rating.
You've what?
I've failed your rating for the business idea, because time has been too long.
Well, you know, life gets in the way, okay? And you know, we've all got family aspirations and things we need to do. I sincerely mean that all the guys and girls on this course have invested heavily in their academic education, and you've got great experiences. So make sure when you do take a step, you've covered as many bases to make sure it's the right step as you possibly can, because you're all incredibly capable, and you should be able to make a success of most things.
Okay, thank you.
Cheers, Jimmy.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Nchimi. Next up, Lubinda has a question. So again, Lubinda, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, please. Can you hear me?
Yes, Lubinda, hi.
I'm okay. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
Yes, please. I just wanted to find out, is there a specific period when somebody should break even in their business, or is it dependent on the capital that you've put in?
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, really good question. There's a range clearly. There is a suspicion if you look at a business plan and you break even in month 2, that someone's been overly optimistic, that someone might have thought of that idea before. So there is a nervousness from people that would look at a business case that says, I am breaking even in month 1. Equally, if break-even point was probably year 4, maybe year 3, you'd start to feel like the return on the money for the risk is uncomfortable, depending on what your exposure is in terms of dollars. It's realistic that you would make a loss depending on the capital requirement, but it's realistic that the first year might be a loss, and you might be cash positive going into year 2. But again, it depends on your service proposition or whether it's a product. And I'm not an expert on I can't give you the analysis, but my feel and my experience is if you've got a business case which shows that you're breaking even very quickly or very late, or, and I say very quickly in the first 3 months or very late, sort of 3 years plus, I'd probably look a bit closer at your assumptions for your revenue line, because it's unlikely to be accurate. Of course, there's a difference there, Lavinda, because if I was, let's say I was a consultant, and I'm a programmer, and I want to sell my contracting skills, there's very little perhaps capital requirement, and you're going to start a business doing that. You're going to break even pretty quickly because your overheads are very low, and whatever you get in, your costs are low. You're going to break even very quickly. I think in a traditional sense, if you've got some capital requirements, some premises, some kit, you should be not uncomfortable with showing a break even in the second, third year.
Thank you so much. It makes so much sense. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no,
makes so much sense. Thank you so much.
Yes, Lavinda.
Yeah, those are really good advice. So thanks again. Next up, Proven from Ghana. Would you like to ask your question, Proven?
Hi, Proven.
Hi. It's been a while. I've dropped out with talks with you because I was busy with other things. Yeah. So my question is that what's the best way to strike a deal with investors? Should it be looking at a fixed percentage before you get things started, or the percentages should drop with time? Maybe after a year, the percentages drop to a point where maybe the investor is at the low end, and then you are at the high end, let's say in terms of percentages. So let's say you start with, let's say 50-50, then it ends up to like 90 and 10 or whatever.
Okay. So that's a really good question. It's a practical one. Right at the end of the process of doing all the hard yards, doing the rough cash flow, doing the business case, getting someone to be interested, and you've determined that equity rather than bank loan is the way. That is a really smart question, and the way that I try to answer it, probably not explicitly enough to your circumstance, but all the work you do up front gives you leverage in that discussion and that negotiation, because it's all about risk to the person putting their equity in. And if you're able to lower their risk, and as you just said, Proven, that if you do the negotiation 2 years into your business, where you've got a business concept that's showing to be sustainable, the amount of risk for that investor in year 2 is significantly different to the risk taken before any money's spent and before any customers have come on board. Yeah. So you would definitely have a much better negotiation in terms of releasing equity. Sometimes, I'm just going to give you sort of a counter argument for you to consider. Sometimes you want, if your investor is is a route to market. Let's say you're working with a wholesaler for farm agricultural equipment and you want to supply into the agricultural guy. If the local wholesaler says, look, great idea, Proven, I would like to invest and help you with your idea. Sometimes you need a big enough chunk of equity to make him interested enough to work for you, if that makes sense. So his motivation to encourage people to buy your products through his wholesaler is maximized. So there is a narrow bridge sometimes where you want him to have enough equity to be interested, but not so much that you have to worry about control. Now, normally, I can only talk from sort of European perspective, but in terms of articles of association and shareholders agreements, if you've got 51% equity, then you have quite a lot of rights. If you've got more than 71%, there are still a subset of rights that you keep. So keeping someone under 30% is different to keeping someone under 50. But you'd need to ask your local, or do some research yourself, frankly, you're bright enough to do that, as to where those lines go. What you can do as well, if you're thinking about a product or service which evolves and you will have different capital requirements day one, then you want to reinvest for a second bit of kit or some business development work year two, is you can tie the investment that's coming in to an equity release. So rather than giving away 40% day one, you give away 20% for this milestone, and then you have the option, is what I would say to you, of calling down another lot of capital for a release of another 20%. So milestones sometimes help the investor as well, that they feel as if they're not putting all their capital in day one with all the risk. But if you, in your business, prove to meet technical and financial milestones, then they will commit to releasing the next tranche of capital for you to release more equity. I have experience of that, and that it's all about having the negotiation discussion to make the investor or funder feel comfortable with his level of risk to his commitment, and for you to feel as if you're keeping the value of your idea that you're working hard to deliver for you and your family intact as well. So, but if you can prove, and if you do want to reach out and have a further conversation on your specific thoughts, then we'd be more than delighted to talk to you again on that.
Okay.
Is that?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So I will send you an email.
Perfect. I look forward to it.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, good. Sounds like Steve will get a lot of business off the end of this, which is also what we like to see. Of course, I think we've been slightly over referring to funders and business leaders as male all the way through this talk, and all the questioners have been male so far. So to fix that, the next question is coming from Naomi. Naomi, do you want to ask your question and say it for the sisters?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. The first female. Hi, Steve. Hi, Melvin. Hi, everyone.
Hey.
It's been a while, Steve. I hope you're doing good.
Yeah, as well as the rest of the folk on this call. We'd all like to be doing something different, Naomi, but we're doing our best, aren't we?
Okay. So my question is that, suppose that you have a business idea that in your country or in your community, it's so new that it's outside, probably outside your country, some people are doing it, but in your country it's so revolutionary that there are no clear customers. Is it okay to you to do a customer research outside and then bring the results in to get it funded, to get an investor in your country just to say, okay, so we don't have it here, but out there somewhere, these are the results.
That's a good starting point, Naomi. Thanks for the question, because sometimes if you haven't got a local service or product, either it's a great idea to bring it in because it works somewhere else, or there could be a reason why there isn't that product or service, and it isn't a good concept to follow. If you've got the evidence from overseas or from across your borders or outside of region, funder for a minute, that should, Naomi, give you a clue as to who you should be speaking to locally, because one of the parts of the talk was, if to define your customers closely, if you have a list of the sorts of people that take this service in other parts of the country or overseas, then if you've got that group of cohort of people in your country or locally, then you should go to those guys and you should be having saying, look, there's a compelling reason why you should be taking this service. Other folk overseas are getting benefits, and and I'm going to provide you with that service. Would you be interested if I could provide that service? And that's where you start to get your evidence and engagement, I think. Naomi.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, no problem, Naomi. Speak again. Look forward to hearing from you.
All right. You hear from me soon.
Yeah, look forward to it. Cheers, Naomi.
Cheers.
Okay, thanks, Naomi. Next up is Wilhelmina. So, Wilhelmina, you should be able to ask your question now. Yep.
Yeah. Hi, Steve.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks for this initiative, Malvin and Pat. Indeed, you have read through our, responses to the survey. Steve, just an honest question. Although the space industry is valued at over 7 billion, as you explained, how especially do we throughout Africa identify which business, small or big, to tap into? Yeah. And although it's okay to dream big, right? Looking at skills as a motivation to start a business.
Yeah.
When leaving DARA right away at whatever level, we often have limited political or creative power as a currency. So considering that, how much of the sector is available at a skills level, and which or what is important to consider?
Great question. Yeah, so I'm educating myself, Wilhelmina. I'm not as comfortable with my knowledge base as I want to be, and I'm trying to be with how we can cross some of those bridges that you've outlined. However, you've got a great network now, certainly in the radio astronomy world, and you've got you know what activities are happening. So let's say, for example, there's somebody who wants to provide a service in agri-tech or illegal mining, in terms of taking data and finding some way of providing that service to a hydroelectric or a power or a governmental service, people who can pay, then you do have to start to talk to those people, like the folk that have radio telescopes that work somewhere, because there are good access to power and bandwidth facilities that allow you to consider tapping into that and having that conversation. So if I was going to, the sort of cross-fertilization that I would be looking at is what are the problems that people who can pay have? Now, and people who can pay are either big organizations, say power, hydroelectric, the big agricultural concerns, government perhaps, and what are their problems and who can pay? And once you get to that, if you've got a skill set which you identify that you can meet their requirements, then you do have a decent network of people now to find out more about how you can get that service to those people. Now, I'm saying that, Wilhelmina, only because I know there's evidence within the people I've spoken to over the last 12 months who've been able to do that. I totally accept your premise that it isn't easy. There's a smaller number of people with existing large business in Africa in the space sector, which is a problem to get started and engaged. But again, you could flip that and say, well, there is the opportunity because there's headroom for people who have the willingness, the perseverance, and the mindset to close it. Do you have a particular thought in mind, Wilhelmina, that's frustrating you can't get across?
I did for a while, but I found the niche. I mean, you mentioned skills and advancing your skills, developing new skills, widening your network as well. So my experiences then are definitely different now, because I started looking at Earth observations and edge devices and neighboring HPC ecosystems. But I still find people, at times it's still hard up until a few months ago. And in some areas, if you want to dream big, it's still hard, but there are still cohorts who find it relatively difficult. And it's just something I wanted to know, whether it's really okay to dream big or...
Yeah. Please do. I mean, dream big, but take concrete steps.
Yeah.
That's the reality, and it's the same wherever you are in the world to some degree of that, because we all have aspirations, and the thing to be aware of, and I think sometimes some of the folk on the call might think I'm a bit negative or not really encouraging. I don't want to come across like that, but the nature of things are, you guys have got great skills, and if you're going to go into a world of uncertainty, you need to work hard and do the research that you would do in other environments to make sure it's the right call for yourselves.
Right.
But beware the emotional attachment to something that you're passionate about. That's a hard scar I've got, and because I've wasted my time and my money doing that, and so you don't need to do that if I've done it.
Right. Thank you, Steve.
No, thank you, Wilhelmina.
All right.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Wilhelmina. So still a few more questions and raised hands around, although I realise time is going on. So let me switch to Sairam, who put a question in the chat window some time back now. Sairam, I'll allow you to ask the question via audio if you want, or I can ask it for you, but see if you can.
Yeah, I think proving hello, good morning to everyone. So,
hey, morning.
Yeah, I think we will ask like a question. I think the same question I was supposed to ask you. Suppose that Mr. A who has a startup already, or he's actually doing a startup, and he has done all his financial analysis,
Sairam, you've got a lot of background noise. I think I'll have to ask the question for you there. Sorry about that. I'm hoping it's the same question that was in the chat window. So Sarah had a hypothetical question. So suppose Mr. A finished all his or her analysis and has Mr. or Mrs. B as a co-funder who wants to fund Mr. A's business. What advice would you give to Mr. A in terms of financial agreements? So this is kind of working with someone, I guess, and how to handle that situation.
There's the big span there of what the potential relationship could be, and the level of risk B is exposing themselves to. If you've got say Ram, if you've got all your contracts lined up like ducks in a row, all your customers for the next year or two are level of certainty, then your conversation with your co-funder would be more likely to be, I need some money to buy some equipment to enable me to do all that, in which case you would probably like to think about some kind of loan agreement where you agree on some interest rates that you're happy to pay and they're happy to receive for the upfront payment, which would be, I would suggest, something, if you looked at the arrangement, something that was more akin to a little bit more attractive than a bank rate. That would be sensible to me. If there's more risk in the business, you traditionally often a mix of two, of equity and loan, because then you're mitigating the second party's risk. But depending on the level of risk, it depends how aggressive they're going to be and how big their input is. But again, you and I have started a conversation, and I would be very happy to speak to you about the specifics. I probably wouldn't advise you on what to do, but I could certainly sanity check your thoughts and make sure you weren't walking off a cliff in what you were going to agree with them. But at the risk of not giving any sort of helpful answer, it does depend on the level of input and risk. But if it's low, get an interest rate on a loan that you're happy to pay back over 2 or 3 years. If it's a high risk, keep it below the level of control. So I think whether it's in country, it's 50% or 30%, I would keep it below those levels. And let's take some advice on what that stops you from doing. If you're in charge of your business, sometimes when you release equity, shareholders can have rights which put limitations on your actions. Avoid equity if you can.
Jolly good. Hope that answered your question, Sarah. I'm sorry for there was a lot of background noise there, and the perils of lockdown questioning with family in the background is always tricky, and dogs, as we've heard this morning as well. So. We had a question come in from an anonymous attendee. Now, the only issue there, of course, is I can't unmute. I don't know who it is, so I can't unmute you to ask your question. And so I'd probably urge people to not send in questions that way, because we're all friends here, and there are no stupid questions in a DARA talk, I can assure you. If there is, I'll probably ask them myself. But I'll just ask this one. So it's a very good question, I think. So Steve, what do you think are the major reasons of failure of businesses, whether in developing or developed countries?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think, what do they say? It's in the UK, I think only 30% of businesses that start in day one are around at the end of year one. I think it's some, I might have got my figures slightly not up to date, but it's a significant proportion fail within a year. And usually, I in my experience, because I've worked I was doing my own thing, and I've been successful and I've been unsuccessful. I've advised companies in the UK, and generally, it's a level of optimism that they really shouldn't have. When businesses fail, they are blinkered to the objective case that I was trying to put in front of you and what you guys are trained in, because they had a sense, or I have had, or people who failed have had, in the belief that other people can see it as clearly as they can and will pay the money that they think they should be worth. And that's moving from a sense of feel into a sense of evidential objectivity. And I think along that spectrum, you increase your chances of surviving, or of being successful and surviving and being sustainable. There are, of course, good examples of where there is a good appetite from customers and there is a good product and service, where you have cash flow issues. And I know I have a personal experience of having difficulty in one business that I started, which was to do with the rate of growth and being complacent and thinking that orders can continue to come in at the rate at which they were, and not put in place some of the safety nets with having capital resource behind me for when the months dropped, or when I had a bad debt, which is what happened, which allowed the pressure to come on the business that I shouldn't have let happen. Now, so A, it's people who are being too optimistic in their assessment of what the customers will pay, and then B, being complacent, starting to look good and not maintaining a focus on protecting the core business, because you're only as good as your cash flow at the end of the day, and the bank is the arbiter of how successful your business is. I'm trying to think of other reasons why businesses fail, but those are the two that come to me immediately. Whoever's asked the question, I think it's a great question.
Yeah, so it was Nai, I think, from Madagascar, I suspect.
Nai, yeah, good question.
Yeah, so, and no need to apologize. I think, I like people to be able to ask their own questions, because it's good to, it's good to hear all the voices of our participants during these meetings, as well as just the speakers, I think. So yeah, many thanks for that. Again, I think we'll try and finish in 5 minutes or so, I think. So Eugene has had his hand raised for a while, so I presume you want to ask a question, Eugene. So, and I'd quite like to hear your voice to make sure you're okay in Ghana, being the co-supervisor of your PhD in Leeds at the moment. So Eugene, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marvin.
Hi, Eugene.
Yeah, hello, and thank you, Steve, for such a fantastic lecture. Yeah, one question I want to ask is, which is bothering my mind, is about going sole proprietorship and partnership. Can you give me a clear distinction about the two, and which one is more advisable for one to engage in?
Could you repeat the two phrases you dropped out then?
Sole proprietorship.
Sole proprietorship, yeah.
And partnership. Can you give me a clear between the two, and which one is the best, is advisable for someone like me if I want to venture into business, which one is more appropriate for me to?
Thank you, Eugene. I think, will you correct me if I've got this wrong? I think your question was what you see I see the differences between sole proprietorship and partnership as progress. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Brilliant. Okay. Yeah, that's a real question that many people will ask when they start considering their business idea, because you start getting excited about something, you do a little bit of research, and you share that with your friends and family, and it's not unusual for other interested parties to say, oh, I can help you with that. So there's a couple of things to consider here, without knowing your personal circumstances, which again, Eugene, I'll make the offer. Please share them if you feel happy and comfortable in doing so subsequently. But sole proprietor, you are, on the one hand, you have autonomy. You have the ability to make decisions that you instinctively feel are right, and you don't have to, in inverted commas, waste time by convincing others or finding a consensus to a way forward. I can certainly share that I thought it was a good thing to do in the past to have a collective of people on one business that I was working in, and it went okay, but I felt very frustrated that things that were quite obvious to me about what was essentially my vision of what I wanted to do was taking longer to make things happen, because I had to take other people with me in that process. If you're sole proprietor, you can employ that. If you've got a key person you want to be in partnership with, you can employ that key person, and you can still treat them with the respect and the engagement which you want to, but the actual governance of your business is different. So you can, at that point, a key point, say, ask for opinion, and then say, look, I respect that, that's interesting. On reflection, I feel I'll make this decision in the best interests of my business as a sole proprietor. So you're there, that's one of the positives. Equally, you're quite in a vulnerable position, because you're taking every worry, every concern, every decision. It can mount up to be something that can be quite stressful unless you're an individual that's confident you can take it. And I don't think I would do that. I don't think I've ever done a sole proprietor job, because I don't think I'm best suited to cope with all those pressures and concerns. So yeah, you've got to think about those pressures. Equally, if you've got a partnership, and as I say, you could employ key skills, or you can employ key people or friends and keep the governance as a sole proprietor. If you choose to come in partnership, then you've got to make sure there's a fair division of activity and responsibility and areas of authority, so that you are not, you'll have a view on your partnership's area, and you will express that view because you both care about your business, but you will leave them with the position to run and deliver the things they said they could deliver in their responsibilities, in the same way that you'd hope he or she would allow you to do the things in your area of responsibility that you committed that you could deliver. The other good thing about a partnership, I'm speaking as someone who's an advocate, if you've got the choice, is when you've got things which are negative, you share the pain. All right, that's one thing. I've said that. On the also side, when you get to the top of the mountain, when you've achieved things, you've got the big contract come through, you're very happy that you've been able to pay yourself a salary you didn't think you would be able to. When you get to that point, you're at the top of the mountain, you share the view with someone else. And I think at that point, it increases the pleasure that you're doing something collectively. But that's a personal view. And there's some of the reasons you might want to think about, Eugene, before you make, a sort of concrete step one way or the other. There are puts and takes either way, but hopefully I've shared a couple with you. And if you wanted to reflect further, then obviously I'd be delighted to follow up with you offline.
Thank you very much, Steve. And thank you very much, Stephen. I have some business plans in mind, proposals, and when I come back to Leeds, I will be very happy to have a discussion with you. I will see the word so that everything will be on.
Great, thank you, Eugene. Thanks for the question as well.
Yeah, good to hear you, Eugene, and obviously thinking of business ideas while you're field work is on a bit of hold there for the PhD at Leeds. To bring the final question, I think will come from Albert, also from Ghana, but currently doing his master's in Mauritius. So Albert, I think it's a suitable last question. So you want to go ahead?
Yeah, hi Malvin.
Hi.
Hi Steve.
Hi Albert.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. It has inspired a lot of interest in most of us. My question is, what kind of business ideas will you and DARA will be so much interested in to nurture from the onset? And in addition to this question, I would like to make this proposal or suggestion to DARA if going forward, they can start also making available for some kind of fundings for some of these brilliant business proposals that will benefit the DARA community as well. Thank you.
I might, in time-honored fashion, I might leave the second question on money to the one who has the money, which is Melvin. I'm a taker of the money. I'm not a provider. So that's the second part, Albert. The first part's a really smart question to ask. Now, I mentioned briefly about the relationship between your skill sets and the sort of requirements that you might see in the sort of local communications, space communications, data fields. But equally, there are unrelated, seemingly unrelated areas of activity which perhaps draw on your skills that you've acquired through the DARA program. Melvin will fill in the gaps of what I say, but if you looked at a hierarchy of things that DARA would want me to be most interested in helping pursue, they would probably start with those levels of activities, those business opportunities that have been influenced by your DARA skills, by your academic skills that you've sort of enhanced by your networking and your skill sets as part of the DARA program. So I'm not saying I wouldn't talk to you about things outside of that, but Melvin and the team would be very keen if we were able to support and realize businesses that build on the skills that you've acquired through the program. Does that feel right, Melvin?
Absolutely.
But notwithstanding that, Albert, Melvin's more than relaxed about me having conversations with your colleagues and your DARA, current and previous DARA students that have other thoughts, because why not? It's a good thing to do. But hopefully that answers the question, and Melvin can draw in some of the colour on the second part of the question.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that was exactly the right answer. You could give a flippant answer. The kind of businesses we'd like to see are successful ones would be another answer. In any sphere, I think. So again, it depends what hat you're wearing, but from the Newton Fund perspective, and especially as we're now in this phase where we're positioning ourselves to bid for more funding in the future, then what will really help us get more funding to move DARA forward in the future is to have people start businesses that do relate in some way. It can be fairly tenuous, but in some way relate back to the skills that you may have picked up through the DARA. So, that could be sort of research skills, computing skills, data handling skills, image processing type skills, or on the related sort of big data and AI side as well. So and obviously we've, our industrial partners are in the sort of space and communications areas. So, that would be an easy sell for us to send back to our funders saying, we did what we said we were going to do, and the project has helped with, job creation, wealth creation, economic development, even if it's in a small way. But similarly, and I think that's been a theme of Steve's excellent talk here this morning was, don't let me pressure you into trying to, generate a successful business and overstretch yourself, because that's also no good to any of us. So, I wouldn't worry about sort of DARA in that context necessarily. It's got to come from you. The motivation's got to come from you, And, you know, we're putting up the network of people. There are many people you can ask, you know, it's not just me and Steve, you know, you've got experts on all sorts of fields within the DARA family. You know, you can bounce ideas off them. So do that. Your idea about, you know, potentially DARA funding bits of seed corn money. I mean, we've talked about this amongst ourselves a few times now. We probably can't really do it in the confines of the current project. And, you know, a mantra I trot out now and again is that DARA is not a bank. Right? We're not a grant awarding or a loan awarding sort of project. You know, we've got our core project to deliver, and that's what we do. But you know, we can see some merit now, perhaps in you know, and if we can justify it, then giving small seed corn funding to help people get business ideas off the ground would be perhaps a good avenue to go down. So it's certainly up there in our consideration at the moment. So, okay, well, that's been a really excellent session. It's, you know, we can tell by the number of questions and the level of detail and the level of interest, really, that, you know, there's a massive demand and interest for this kind of area within the DARA cohort. So again, it's difficult for us to give you a round of applause, Steve, in the confines of Zoom, but I'm sure everyone, on behalf of everyone, I'd like to thank you. I will do that, and oh, well done. Yeah. People who've asked a question can unmute themselves and clap to that, so they can do that.
Okay.
Well done, Steve.
Thank you.
Well done, Naomi. So yeah, many thanks. That was extremely informative. As I say, I'll hand back over to Trish now for the rest of the announcements. So Trish, if you want to.
Great, yes, thank you very much, Melvin, and thank you, Steve. You know, thank you for giving your time, a very informative talk, and I'd just like to say to everybody again, please do reach out to Steve if you need any further business advice. I will be sending out an email link to request your feedback, because your feedback is very important to us. So please do complete the form as soon as you can. It's also an opportunity to put forward suggestions for future e-seminars. So at the end of the day, we want to deliver what the participants are looking for. Whether it's science, more business development advice, you know, please do feedback to us. So since the demand for our e-seminars is still high, and this is from both participants and presenters, we do have a number of presenters queued up waiting to give their e-seminars, their talks. So we will continue to aim to host approximately 2 a month, and these will continue to be open to current and former DARA Big Data and Soreo trainees that are funded by our South African partner. The upcoming e-seminars that we have planned include Carla Sharp from Soreo. That will be on the 24th of June. And the talk is about space science and technology for growth, relating to the AVN and co-location. Registration will open, hoping by the end of this week. So please keep your eye out for that, and do join us. Thereafter, we have Professor Peter Wilkinson from the University of Manchester, scheduled in on the 8th of July. And again, further details will be announced. But maybe, Melvin, could you give a bit of an outline as to what we should expect?
From Peter?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, so Peter's been beavering away, using some DARA funds to build up a practical kit, basically, to do some, you know, hands-on radio astronomy that will be delivered. So several kits will be delivered to each AVN country. So this will take the form of a small antenna, which is referred to as a cantenna. You literally build it out of a sort of an empty food can, and he's put together, you know, some cheap electronics and software-defined radio to turn that into a device that can detect the hydrogen line emitted, you know, from the Milky Way and that kind of thing, so that you can actually do some real hands-on radio astronomy. So this would be good for university experiments and demonstrating things at outreach as well.
Great, thank you. So also we have a YouTube channel, so we will continue to post the recorded e-seminars that we have. So please have a look at that. You may have missed an e-seminar. They're on demand to watch whenever you want. And also kindly subscribe to that channel so you will be made aware when we have new videos to that. With regards to social media, we do make announcements on Twitter and on our Facebook group. That's a closed group, so you will have to request access to that. So again, follow us on Twitter and also join our Facebook group. I think that's everything I have. Yeah, nothing further to add, so I'll pass back to Melvin. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Trish. Yeah, we've got several more speakers lined up as well. So Rod Hine will be talking about amateur radio. Roger Dean has promised a seminar as well now. So we've got several more to come. Okay, I think that's it for today. So thanks to Steve and thanks to everyone for joining.
Thank you, Melvin. Thank you, Steve. Thank you,
Thank
Trish.
you.
Have
Thank
a
you.
good
Bye-bye.
day. Bye.
Bye.